So we are located at Moss Landing Marine Laboratories, August 6th, 2016, and it's the 50th anniversary. I'm here with Merritt Tuel, and what makes this occasion even more special is that Merritt and I worked together for 3 years between 1975 and 1977 at the Marine Ecological Institute and spent many hours aboard the research vessel Inland Seas. And we've been chatting, and we're going to recall a couple of events that happened so that I can have Merritt's point of view, and I can then fill in my point of view later. So, welcome, Merritt, and I'm just thrilled that I get a chance to meet you again after all these years. And
feelings mutual.
And you were our fearless leader, one step below the real fearless leader, Bob Rutherford, which takes us back to the Marine Ecological Institute and the many adventures that we had at that time. And one of those momentous adventures was when the time we almost sunk in the central San Francisco Bay. And I'd like to kind of hear your remembrances from that event. So it's your turn, Merritt.
Alrighty. It was a nice sunny day. We were doing our regular cruise in which one of us would do chemistry, one would do invertebrates, one of us would do fish, and one of us would do, what would I leave out?
Zooplankton?
Geology.
Oh, the grab sampler.
The grab sampler and the flagger core.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Oh, the flagger core.
And I was working on deck, so I was either teaching ichthyology or geology, I don't remember which, and someone came up and said that the carpet was wet in the invertebrate lab. And so I went down I had assumed that someone left a sink on or something, and I went down to the invertebrate lab, and when I stepped in, my boot sank about 2 inches, and water poured up, so that I suddenly realized that this wasn't a leak, that something terribly wrong was going on. So I ran up to the bridge and yelled, "We're sinking!" And then Paul had everyone else herd kids onto the foredeck. I assume this was going on.
Yeah. And this is Paul Jones. He's the captain at that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I stayed below to open the bilge pumps. And so
that's kind of dangerous, though, going down below deck like that.
Well, we had kids on board. You were going to have to try.
Right, exactly.
And it was just one single 2 or 3 step staircase to get me back up into the main lab where I could have gotten out easily. So It wasn't that bad. So to turn on the bilge pumps, you have to lay down on the deck and stick your arm into the bilge and turn a valve. And by that point, the water had gotten up to the point where it was just starting to come over onto the walkway. And I remember feeling very nervous about it because I didn't want to, I would have to stick my head underwater to do it if I was going to do it any later. And I really didn't want to stick my head underwater.
Yeah, like bilge water.
Wow. So I turned it on, but our bilge pump was a feeble little thing, and it wasn't doing any job at all. So then I stayed down there to try to keep the generator running. It was a problem because the fan blades were starting to hit water and splashing water up on the generator. And if we lost the generator, we lose electricity, and we wouldn't be able to have radio anymore. But Paul had already contacted the Coast Guard, and they were already getting ready to run it aground on a boat ramp in Berkeley. And this is I wasn't there to see it. I was down below, but this is the chronology of what I think happened.
Okay.
And then as I was working down there, the strangest thing happened. This giant snake came through the open porthole. And by giant, I mean it was about 2 feet wide, and it was infinitely long. And I'm going, okay, today was going to be weird. It's weird anyway. And it turned out that, upon closer inspection, it wasn't a giant snake. The Coast Guard had arrived, and they were pushing a big bilge pump
Through a
tube
porthole?
through the porthole in the engine room. And so all I had to do was grab that bilge pump, that tube,
Yeah.
and stick it in the bilge. And since it was the Coast Guard and they had some serious pump, the water just started to go away in a hurry. It just sucked it.
Now,
down.
is this while we're heading towards the Berkeley Marina, or we had already grounded it in the Berkeley Marina?
I believe we had already grounded, and I think the Coast Guard just came up beside us on that boat ramp and started pushing this tube through the porthole.
So let me add just a little bit. You were down below deck, and I was up on deck and in the pilot house. And like you say, Mayday was calling, and there was a certain signal that Paul was tooting on the horn, which would indicate to clear out, because we were heading for the Berkeley Marina on a weekend, and there were sailboats tacking in front of us. And it was like, oh, look at the big boat. And he would be, give it, what was 3 blasts or something like that. And he's doing Mayday on the radio at the same time. And the sailboat was just tacked right in front of us. And we weren't going to stop because we were listening, I guess, to the rear port or something like that.
We were listening to port because that's where the problem was.
Okay, anyway, so we head straight into the Berkeley Marina. I don't know who thought of it, but I assume Paul did, to run it aground, or Coast Guard said run it aground at the boat launch ramp. And so continue there. We've run aground.
We've run aground, and now this tube is sucking water out at a high rate of speed, and so we're pushing up a little further as we get lighter. And then that was pretty much the action. Apparently the students were offloaded over the bow or something. I'm not really sure.
They went over the bow, and we used rope line, and they actually climbed down. Mm-hmm. And I remember we had one adult, and he was 3 weeks out from open heart surgery.
Oh God!
And we had people in life vests ready to go in the water, but we didn't want this guy to go in the water with that condition. But basically, we climbed a rope down onto the boat ramp, which was maybe 8 or 10 feet, but it was just what we thought to do, But anyway, so continue there.
So then a good long time passed, enough time for our director, Rutherford, to call his brother, who was a really smart engineer, to make it to where we were to try and diagnose the problem.
Yeah.
And when he came down, he was very quickly able to determine that our shaft had decoupled from the V-drive and had wound its way out of the boat, leaving a 1.78 inches of direct tube to sea with no
right,
valves.
A hole in the boat that size.
A hole in the boat.
Yeah.
And he just took a broomstick and a plastic cup on the end of the broomstick covered by a rag and jammed it in there and dramatically slowed the incoming water.
Wow, okay.
And then at that point, Mark Gibson and I rented scuba tanks and an engine come-along.
Yeah.
Oh, I take it back. First, he said that the prop and the shaft might still be connected to the boat. It may have bound itself between the two support struts, and maybe we just dragged it along. And so we went out to the stern of the boat and looked out over the back, and there was the prop and the shaft just hanging there.
Yeah, which is an extremely expensive piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And it hung up on its guides or whatever, and we brought it all the way with us.
And which was wonderful, because then we didn't have to wait for all this stuff to be shipped to us to repair the boat.
Yeah.
So Mark and I got the scuba tanks and the come-along, and then we went down and started wrenching on we would take turns wrenching on the come-along to move the shaft inch by inch back where it was supposed to be. I remember at one point the tide was going out, so my flipper started to hit bottom, and that made me very nervous, in that I was worried I might get trapped between the bottom of the boat and but we knew that problem was there, and so we kept ourselves out of harm's way, and we just kept wrenching. It was just a lot of work. We went through a number of tanks because we were breathing heavily just to keep that come along moving. And then once it had made it back to where it was supposed to be, Bob Rutherford's brother put the bolts on that were necessary to hold it in place, and essentially the boat was completely fixed.
Yeah, like in a matter of an afternoon, it seemed like.
It was just a few hours after, and we were good to go. Then we were told to take the boat back to the home port in South San Francisco Bay. One of the problems was that when the water came up, it lifted a lot of muck and goo underneath the generator, and enough to touch the fan blades of the generator. And so on the way back, I noticed that there was smoke, and I went down to investigate, and the generator was on fire. And so it was a complete day. And so I ran up and screamed fire in the starboard engine room, and then Paul shut down the starboard engine, but I didn't want to turn off the generator because that was our only power. And so I took a fire extinguisher, and I stuck it in the bilge there where the fire was going, and turned it on, which was a mistake, but the generator running because it just kicked it up in the air and covered me in
muck,
and came out looking like Frosty the Snowman with all this carbon dioxide stuff all over me. And I remember walking up into the main lounge there, and everybody just bursting into laughter when I got up there. But that again solved that problem. Again, the boat was 100% ready to go, and we just turned the starboard engine back on and made our way back down to the South Bay.
So before piloting it back to Redwood City, we're on the boat ramp as the tide is rising and falling.
Yeah.
I remember after you and Mark labored, which seemed like several hours, like you said, inch by inch, I remember Bob bringing us, like in these little styrofoam dinner serving things. I think it was like these steak sandwiches, which just looked horrendous. But we were so hungry.
Oh yeah.
and I think we were drinking rum or something like. Somebody brought a bottle. Of the excitement of that whole day, I remember Mark and I, we were slept out up on the bow of the boat, up on deck, and it's like just shortly after sunrise, and in the overcast in the summertime and the fog and whatnot, and we're sleeping there, and you're kind of in a haze, and all of a sudden we hear footsteps on the deck. At least I heard it. I don't know, Mark might have been still asleep. And then somebody comes up and kicks me and kicks Mark. It turns out that these guys, they were going to launch their little 24-foot boat or something to go out fishing. And of course, this 85-foot long, 110-ton boat is on the launch ramp. And he's kicking us and he goes, "Move your boat." Like we're sitting there in these cheap sleeping bags, looking up, going. So I don't know if you were sleeping up on deck or below deck, but that's that I remember that.
I missed that.
Oh God, that was so dumb. How are we going to move the boat? We have to wait for the tide. All right, we're going to end that story. Bob Rutherford and Carolyn Rutherford will tell their story at a future date. So we're continuing with Merritt, and he has agreed to kind of give a little insight and comments about some of the people we work with, from memories that he has or little things that he remembers about them. And we'll start with, as we called him, our fearless leader, Bob Rutherford. What are some things that come to mind about Bob?
Bob was a very civil person. He would always want everyone to be very nice to each other and watch their language and polite exactly, and didn't push real hard. It was let me do pretty much anything I wanted, and just did his business. He was more of a politician type. He worked with the people who had money trying to get money.
He could
And
glad hand people and
Yeah.
schmooze and make them feel important.
And then he could say, he could word things in very political, politician type speak that would, he wouldn't say, we're running out of money, we're all going to die. He'd be, we
Even
could
though
use-
that was true.
we could use a few more resources type of thing. He was very good at that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
You kind of mentioned, he let you do a lot of things. Did you recognize or accept that you were like the right-hand man? You were like kind of the top dog guy when it came to running things. Did you ever see yourself in that capacity at that time?
I saw myself as having way more responsibility than I felt I was qualified for.
Right.
When they wanted me to do the Pillar Point Harbor study, I was just at sea. And looking back on it, the smart thing would be to have actually utilized all those PhDs that were on our board and gone to them and say, okay, we have this much money to do this kind of study. What should we do? But I always just thought I was on my own and sort of made it up on my own.
Yeah.
But what bothered me the worst was when Mark Kehoe and Jan Kankerlik
Yeah.
decided that they were going to open a marine supply company out of the institute in which we would supply live specimens to schools and such.
No.
And
Wannabe Ed Ricketts, huh?
yeah, well, you look in the biological catalogs and you can order a jellyfish. And so they said, oh, we can do that. And then as soon as they started it up and before the first order came in, they both left. And so someone came in and said, I would like a jellyfish. And so they sent us out in a boat from the southern bay all the way out past the Golden Gate into the ocean there to try and find a friggin' jellyfish, and we never did. So they bit off way more than they could have chewed, and I was in way over my head and trying to tell Bob that we just simply weren't capable of doing that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you felt uncomfortable at times in that, in what Bob would put situations he'd put you in. So
Well, I probably blame Mark and Jan more for that
Okay.
situation because they thought they could do it and they instigated it, but then before it started, they left
yeah, and I came in '75, which was after
after they both left.
then. Okay, let's move on to Carolyn Rutherford.
The quintessential gentle soul. She would sit at her desk and be very smiling and supportive and never have a bad word to say about anyone and very quiet and really good person, but she just didn't have
and
much
she
to say.
did, I think, reading for the blind. That was like one of her volunteer activities, like I recall. Do you want to make any comments about their children or
No, I just didn't know that. But the two boys were just regular rambunctious boys.
Yeah. And they didn't seem to hang out much out.
No, they weren't interested in that. So they were too young, I would guess.
All right, let's move on to some of the staff that I remember working with. We'll start with Betty Bogle.
Betty Bogle is a very independent, strong woman. You don't want to mess with her. And she can be a really good friend. And she and I got a good working relationship going, and we would work together hard and get things done.
Yeah.
And she was smart, and I like Betty. She's just.
Do you recall where she went after MEI or her stay at MEI?
She told me, but I forgot. There was a company or something that she got.
Did it have to do anything with science in any way, or was just something totally different?
It might have been some sort of science, but it was a private company doing something that I can't remember.
And then there was Rucker
Hauer.
Okay.
And he was another guy that I don't have.
He was there for a short time.
Yeah, I don't have big recollections about him.
Okay, we'll move on. Michael Wilderman.
Michael Wilderman was sort of reserved in some ways and not in others. He would He had his. He never spoke very loudly, and it was always hiding behind his beard. And he would irritate everyone in the lab by playing hardcore jazz real loud.
Right. He was definitely a jazz aficionado.
Yeah. And he invited me to his house, and his wife. It was real nice, and he worked hard on the Pillar Point project. We actually were paid to send him to Washington D.C. to work on the amphipod expert in the U.S. and identifying those amphipods. And so he was really a good egg. He worked hard, did good work, and
he was. I mean, we weren't paid that much.
No.
And he had a wife and two children, I think, at that time. So he was kind of like an outlier for your quote typical MEI employee at the time. He
had responsibility.
Human. All right, Mark E. Gibson, who we dubbed Dr. Nosebig at one point. We all took our last name. Cram Nosebig. And he was, I think, the best flipping the last name and first name around.
I was
Cram
Loot.
Say that again?
Termit Loot. Yeah, but Mark was a happy guy, big happy guy.
Buddha boy.
He was a great photographer, energetic, liked to do stuff. Always
good time boy, right?
Good time boy would have ideas about what good times we should have, and then also worked real hard when that was time. I like Mark. Mark's good.
Yeah, he was a good positive energy force.
Yes.
Then later on, we had some reason I think of Brian Johnson and Karen Kiefer, kind of contemporary around the same time period. I think Brian came first or after Karen. I'm not sure, but
I have a black hole on Brian. I don't remember him at all.
Yeah, I do remember after we got the big hole punched in the side of the boat in that freak storm in November, is that he was there and we were driving up. I would drive up with Dave Stager, and Brian would meet us at Hunter's Point to work on the boat, and he was there every day during the repair process, whatever that was, like a month or something.
Wow.
But I do remember that. He seemed to be a really nice guy, and I was like totally shocked. Diane and I were together at that time. He asked me to be his best man at his wedding.
Wow.
And I don't think I even knew him a year. He hadn't even been a year. And I felt kind of awkward, but also honored. And I remember I escorted his parents around. They came from wherever, somewhere in the Midwest or something. And I'd drive them and show sceneries in San Francisco. But that's about it. I think he ended up working in Foster City. You say you don't have much recollection.
No, I
don't. Tell the Karen Kiefer story then about the trawl net getting tangled in the prop. What we talked about earlier.
Well, she was pulling in the otter trawl. And
well, describe kind of her stature. She was
she was not real tall.
Yeah, like 4'9". Yeah, an Olympic gymnast and a little bit pudgy.
A little bit, thicker. But she was she was determined to do well, and she was a bright spot. I really like Karen. She
definitely enthusiastic
and fun to be around, and so anyway, she's pulling in the otter trawl, and it's possible to get it caught in the props if they don't maintain a little bit of forward momentum when you're pulling it in, especially right at the end where the trawl is trying to come up over just come out of the water. It can swing against the back of the boat and there get caught up in the props, and so she was new at it and got it caught up in the prop, and so people were deciding to play with her and told her she had to jump in and unscramble it, which of course no one ever did, but she did.
And we both gave her kudos for that all these years later. That I don't think I would have done it.
I wouldn't have done it. I said, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
So she earned her chops that day.
So let's we'll do two more things. I think we can kind of be brief. You mentioned Pillar Point Harbor, which was an year-long environmental impact report.
It's more of an
for the
environmental assessment.
assessment.
It
whatever.
wasn't a legal environmental, which is a legal document.
Okay. And it was like the Harbor District, I think, hired.
Harbor District hired us to
Right.
do an assessment because they wanted to expand the harbor, and the harbor already had some problems with erosions. On
Yeah.
the,
You know, I have a copy of that report.
really?
I have the whole thing,
Oh man!
still with the blue cover on
Oh
it.
God! I was hoping that thing had
Yeah.
lost seeing the light of day.
No, I quote it very often. No, not.
Yeah.
So what are what are some of like the highlights you remember about the year that we spent doing that? Because it opened up, like you mentioned, it sent Michael Wilderman to Washington D.C. for amphipods. I got exposed to all the polychaete worms, which took me to Cal Academy and meeting an expert, Bill Light, who became kind of a friend, and he even autographed his own book on I don't remember the family name, but he's an expert on this one family of polychaete worms. So what are some highlights that you remember?
I remember being very cold on the beach doing otter trawls or dragging a purse seine in
Yeah.
and out as part of the fish study. I remember we could never get that damn boat to start. I remember that we could never get the oxygen temperature salinity sensors to work.
YSI, dissolved oxygen. Did we have
Yes.
them at that time?
We had that.
Yeah.
What the reason was, it turns out that we said it never ever works to the company, and we would send back to the company, and they would stick it in a big barrel, and it would work, and then they would send it back to us, and it would work for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then it would never work. And the problem turned out to be the fact that the cable that we lowered it with had a pinhole puncture, and so it would be dry when they had it stuck in their 55-gallon drum. But as soon as I lowered it into the water, it would fill up and the machine would stop working. And so we fought over that, and no one would. So finally, one day I was pulling it out of the water, and when we got to that part of the cable, a big stream of water was taking a leak.
Like a
out of
little
it.
kid peeing
Yeah,
in a pond.
Exactly. So I remember we were launching the boat, and Deborah Helms was holding a line, and I figured that she would just get up on the ramp there, or on the
Dock area.
dock area,
Yeah.
but she walked right into the water with the boat, all the way up to her waist, and she impressed me then. I said, well, I go, why did you do that? But also, I was surprised that she would do that.
Yeah.
And I remember trying to pull up the anchor during a big windstorm and just failing it. It was just stuck to the bottom with everything I could do to pull it up. And then I went back to get something for my hands because they were getting worked out from pulling on that rope, which was exactly the moment the anchor decided to give it up on its own. And so while I was looking down, the boat drifted underneath the pier, and I'm looking at pilings on both sides. You cannot tell me you just did that.
Now, I recall too, I think it was you and Betty would don scuba gear and like you do like a underwater transect or
yeah.
something. And was one of you bumped one time and you thought maybe it was a harbor seal?
I wasn't.
I mean, a harbor porpoise was in
yeah.
the harbor, that little harbor there.
It might have been Betty. I was. We were just following it along, looking for critters on both sides of this.
Yeah.
And we may have been taking coffee can cores along the way.
Yeah.
And so that was that purpose. And I remember the water being real cold.
And murky.
And murky, yeah.
Yeah.
You get down there, you wanted to make sure you were moving upstream, and everything disturbed by your flippers was going away. But that didn't happen too often. I think we may have done it 4 times in the entire study.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, kind of the big picture, the story of life kind of thing. Me being a retired educator, I always look at things from an educational point of view, or what students could do. And I think we understand like the things that we did aboard the inland seas really did fuel the thought process with kids, because they were hands-on, working like a marine scientist, and doing those grab samples and otter trawls and plankton tows and water chemistry stuff. They were really experiencing it. Where do you see, here we are in 2016, decades later, where do you see marine education and the environment? Where has it been? Where is it? And where is it going? Where do you think things have gotten better in terms of our, I guess, awareness of, our environment and the world around us? Because we had a goal. We were, ecology. That was a big thing then. And is it still a big thing now in 2016? And where do you see things going in the future?
I still believe it's a big thing. It's just become so natural and ingrained to us to take ecology as part of a policy that we just don't notice we're doing it anymore.
Yeah.
There are just so many activities that could happen. An oil spill in Pillar Point Harbor back then, so what? Nowadays, you'd have somebody out there with a boom real fast, even for a teeny tiny one, cleaning it up, and that's just standard procedure now. So a lot of what we were working for, I believe, was achieved into standard procedure, and I think that it is continuing to improve, not as fast as you want, but I think things are getting better. I think one of the big benefits from the Institute was for the people that were working there, and that we just learned a whole lot about the Bay. And so when we went on to do other things, we had a set of knowledge, or a base of knowledge that allowed us to get a head start when we were going into graduate school and stuff. We didn't have to learn a lot of things and we understood a basic Winkler titration and what a flager core was, and a Peterson grab, and an otter trawl,
and being out on the boat every day, we really did see the interrelationship of the living and the non-living all the time.
The seasons would go by. We would sit there and say, "Don't come out at this time of year. You're not going to see anything, or you're only going to see anchovies." And we got a sense of what was going on in the Bay.
Yeah, and we experienced a drought during that time period, 75 to 77. That's why we saw squid in the South Bay and those sea hares, and 6 and 7 gilled sharks during that time period, which again broadened our knowledge base of, like you were just talking about, of the things that were happening. Not only were there seasonal changes, but there is now the influence of marine, estuarine, freshwater. We saw the changes and fluctuations in that, and we took it forward with us for many of us in our careers.
I remember seeing the saddleback gunnel, Pholus ornata, really pretty fish. Saw one once in the South Bay.
You just triggered a thought. I hadn't said these. Perichthys notatus, the plain fin midshipman. Which I think we named, that was Paul Jones's nickname, was the plain fin midshipman.
It's a good thing we didn't catch a sarcastic fringe head.
Yeah, that was another good one. Wow. Merritt, it's been great seeing you again. And of course, we get to be at this wonderful, a place with $1 billion view, the Moss Landing Marine Laboratories, and get to celebrate. And I'm sure there's other people you want to spend time with. And I'm really glad that I got a chance to be with you, and that you agreed to talk about some of these things, because it's what links us, you and I, together is that moment in our past. And
it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
It's
Thanks
good to
a lot.
reminisce.
Yeah. It's done.
Done.